performative, but I'm not so sure that you have to perform when you're actually writing. I don't feel that it's quite a performance to write a poem because it's so private and internal. You know, maybe when you get up and read it in the coffee house, I don't know. I have mixed feelings about that, really. So, hope you can hear me.
I think what's interesting about the performance question is, I do find that the poets that I enjoy the most when I go to a reading are people who are very connected to the initial experience of writing the poem, and then somehow that, you know, is transmitted into the reading, and you can call it performance or you can just really call it, you know, the reading of it. But, I mean, I think like any good songwriter, they start it in a room all by themselves, but at some point they are out there performing it. And as long as you're kind of touching whatever that root experience or whatever it was that motivated you to write the poem or the song, I mean, I quite enjoy people who are really sharing that root experience when they read their poetry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. Well, when it's good, I love it. But like every other kind of art, I guess there's just a lot of not so good out there. So, like, let's bring Sappho back on the stage, see what she can do.
Yes.
Speaking of that, Dan, if you don't mind, you asked a question about what we're reading lately. I just have to tell you that I just finished reading Emily Wilson's translation of the Odyssey. It's in strict iambic pentameter. Absolutely fantastic, really. You have to read it. It's a 500-page poem, but it goes by like a page turner. It's really, really good. It's just great. I never felt such a connection to ancient poetry as this. So,
I've heard amazing things about it. Okay, I've just added it to my list.
All right, good.
Yeah, thank you for that, Mary.
And you'll see, it's all in it's got this great pulse because it's all, iambic pentameter, which is quite a feat.
Yeah.
500 pages translated in iambic pentameter. What an unbelievable feat, really. That in itself is fantastic, but you forget about that while you're reading it because the story is so good, and she really, really did a good job.
Oh, that's great, because that is a story that it's just it's one of my kind of key motifs, if you will, in terms of how I go through the world and see the world, and so I am really glad to hear that.
You mean an Odyssey? Like an Odyssey?
Well, the Odyssey, but an Odyssey as well, and any kind of meandering that takes you somewhere and often takes you back home again, which is always interesting. And so, yeah.
Carolyn, you know what? We have this in common because I see everything exactly like that. I feel an incredibly strong connection to the whole Odyssey concept in terms of my own life, really.
Yeah. Yeah, I find it really, really motivating, or moving, motivating, perambulating. I love it. Yeah.
I mean, not that I feel like Odysseus or anything, but just like the one trial after another, the Charybdis and all that, just more heartache. In fact, in this translation, it's amazing how often people are saying, and they were weeping, and they kept weeping and weeping, and they were weeping some more, they kept weeping. It's like there's so many tears. Everybody's weeping constantly. It's amazing, really. I guess that's kind of like my life story.
Okay, well, I'm waiting for your long epic poem then.
Yeah, I know. This has really inspired me to feel like maybe it's time, because I've been dreaming sort of about writing an epic poem all my life. Well, not all my life, but for a long time. And maybe this will do it. Maybe this is what I needed to get around to that.
Oh, wow.
Okay. So I want to stay on this topic of background and influences on your writing, but sort of go on the theme that sort of this month has kind of had for a lot of people, and that's with identity. And both of you are involved in Lavender presses, and the idea of the definition of a lesbian poet. And I wonder if is that a strong identifier for you? Like how tied together is your poetry and your identity?
Do you want to go first, Carolyn?
Do you want to go first, Mary?
I'll go first. All right, I'll talk, because I have some very strong ideas about this, as you can probably imagine, seeing as how every project I'm involved in has lesbian connected to it. Lavender Review, Headmistress Press. So let's talk about exclusion and inclusion. And I hope I don't get too furious while I'm talking, because when I was getting my MFA at Columbia in the early 80s, you just did not hear the word lesbian. It just was completely unheard of, especially in relation to poetry. And yet, I was studying with Jane Cooper, who was a friend of Muriel Rukeyser's. And
wow.
I knew who I was, but I also felt like I could not possibly tell anyone, put it in my poems, say anything about it, or I would have been, a pariah in the MFA program. I don't know, Dan, if you can imagine such a thing, but it really was very, very awful and painful to be sort of locked in this, it was like a closet, but not of my choosing.
Mm-hmm.
And, it was like being silenced. It was not a fun thing. Anyhow, it just made me furious, and I was like mad at how many men were just, all the male poets there, they were just completely confident, completely free. They could write about anything. There was no problem with them at all. And I could see very clearly how it was a huge problem for me. And I did not want to have those two parts of me, the lesbian and the poet, split apart. So my work is to join them together for good. I don't see why they shouldn't be joined together, for good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and it's just it's interesting. I'm certainly rather lucky in the identity side of things. I don't have to deal with that necessarily. I'm privileged in that way, I suppose. But it's mind-boggling on a second level for me, because I know poets in my MFA program who are, one of them identified as a queer poet at her final poetry dissertation reading, openly and everything, and was very open with the connection between that and her work. So the idea of it being having to hide it is just I'm not necessarily surprised, because I have awareness of how history's worked, but it doesn't mean doesn't mean it's a good thing. I understand the drive you have for inclusion.
Yeah, and probably because I'm 62 or 3, I can't remember. I think I'm 60. I think I'm 60. Wait till you get this old, you'll forget what your age is. But I think I'm 62. But, I'm probably still, in a way, stuck back in that mindset, and I haven't quite, who knows, maybe I'll never be able to really understand how open and free everything is now for LGBT people, being able to get married and everything. It just can't sort of enter my consciousness completely, although I certainly am conscious of all the things that have opened up. Although I must say, in poetry, no, it is not open there. You don't see lesbian poetry in the major literary journals. It's very, very rare. And if you want me to segue into why I started Lavender Review, that's why. Because I was searching all over, trying to find some lesbian poetry. I mean, it didn't have to be about being a lesbian, but just, open and free about being a lesbian if it came up, like mentioning it, even using the word. I wanted to read about that. In fact, I'll never get anywhere with the Poetry Foundation, especially if I say this, but they don't use the word lesbian on their website. It's just not there. They don't use it about any poets that they talk about, unless it's...
Really?
I haven't seen it. It's
wow.
Like they refuse to mention it. I don't know why. It just seems very bizarre, but that's the way it is, I think. Somehow they feel like it's not important enough, or it's not pertinent, or whatever. I don't know, but I don't know.
Well,
if I'm wrong, let them prove me wrong. Show me the evidence. I'd like to be wrong, but I want to read those poems out there, and so I started Lavender Review because this way I get all the lesbian poems sent directly to me, and they have been. And boy, have I been getting the most amazing poems, really, for the past, what year did I start this? 2010, for the past 8 years. I've been getting the most unbelievably wonderful poems. It's just incredible, really, including poetry by someone named Carolyn Boll. I don't know if you heard of her.
Well, I came out quite late, and in my coming out, actually, it was sort of a fountain of words that came out with it, and having been a dancer, you don't talk, right? So, in fact, I had tried some work where I would use texts and things like that, so it was always sort of around. But when I was dancing, I wasn't out. And in my coming out, I just left the dance world and I started writing, and I could not stop. And it was very much a part of that. And so I don't even remember when I first saw Lavender Review, but it was back when you were doing themes, Mary, and so it was the garden theme, and I was like, wow, okay, I'm going to go out in my garden and I'm going to write a poem, and then I'm going to send it because, oh my God, they said lesbian, and I'm a lesbian, and so I did, and and it wasn't accepted, but that was okay. But then I was like, well, this is so amazing that there's somewhere that I could actually maybe one day have something published that would be where this work would land, and this process that I was going through would land. And so then of course I submitted again, and thankfully you actually published something, and from there I took such fortitude, and I was like, okay, there is a place for this part of me that has just needed to be out there in the world, not just out as a lesbian, but out as a poet and a person who loves words, and I thought, oh my goodness, this is a place that supports this, and to be honest, it made me feel very safe. And Yeah, it made me feel like, okay, there's a tribe here.